Welcome to another Tuesday tutorial by Jordyn Designs. Today's tutorial is going to be about colorizations, which is essentially taking a black and white image and turning it into a colored one. The first thing you're going to want to do is get your black and white image and open it in Photoshop. You're going to drag your layer down to the new button to duplicate it. Once you've duplicated your layer, you're going to go to color balance and set up to get the orangey color of the skin. So it's dragging it to the red, dragging it to the yellow, and getting a nice in between there. It's okay if it's a little too yellow or too red or whatever for you, because we'll fix that at the end with different covering layers. So you merge that together and then add a mask to the orange colored layer. The next thing you're going to do, and this is the worst, most tedious part of the entire project, is erase every single part on here that's not the skin tone or hair color. So essentially background, clothes, the whites of the eyes, any kind of jewelry they might be wearing. Get rid of all the skin tone color on that. You just want the skin and the hair to remain the same color. Now, if you have variations on your Photoshop, it's a much better, I prefer, alternative to using color balance to make the color of the skin, but unfortunately I don't have that option anymore, so this is what I'm stuck with doing. It works with me, however, and it's really nice because it makes sure you get all of the spots filled in instead of trying to use a color to color over top of it. So it makes it even and smooth, and it works really nice. So while you're erasing, you do it on the mask layer, and it's totally fine if you go over top of things that don't mean to be erased, like if you get some of the skin looking gray or some of the hair, because you can easily just flip your eraser around and go back over the parts on the skin. So this is, like I said, this is the part that takes the longest. Once you get everything colored or erased, then it's time to go back in and fix the tiny little details that you colored over. For example, the strands of hair. I know a lot of people will just, go over it with big brushes and not really care, but for me it's all about the details. So you have to zoom in there really close, get a very small brush and make sure that it's on soft, and start going over each tiny little strand like you see that I've been doing here. Opacity is super helpful because there are some strands that are lighter than others. The other tool that is super helpful during this part is the smudge tool. You can use that to spread out the hair color, so that way it doesn't look as thick and blocky, but it actually kind of blends into the background. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going over each of the strands and blending them into the background to really make them look realistic and nice. You'll also see that I zoom in and out a lot because it looks completely different up close than it does once you look at the picture as a whole. So it's really important to zoom in and out while you're doing this so you can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like when you're done, and if there are any areas you need to go back and fix or any areas that you might have missed. Okay, now we get to the part where you actually get to color the hair. And since you've already gone through all of this work of outlining the outer edges, all you have to do is hit Command and then click on the mask, or if you're on a PC, I'm assuming you hit Control and click on the mask, and that'll select the outline of the hair for you. So all you have to do is to pick your brush, pick the color, put the layer mode on color, and then start coloring over the edges so that her hair essentially looks like you're undoing all of your work, but really you're not. And then For the inner parts, like where her bangs are, or parts that you didn't get the edges of the hair, you'll have to go back slowly over those and do the same process to get all of that colored in. But it's a little less work since you already did half of it already. So you go back and do the same thing and make sure all of her hair looks gray. Once you've gotten everything where you need it to be, you're going to lower the opacity way down, like below 30% on her hair. So her hair starts looking a little grayer, less saturated. Then you're going to duplicate that layer, put it on soft light, and that'll make her hair darker, so you kind of pick the opacity you want there. And then I also like to go and do the selective color option and also the hue saturation option and play around a little bit to make her hair look more different from the skin tone than it does. And I definitely change the opacities on that too, so it's not too strong. It's a lot of playing around and finding that right color. Once you do that, then the next thing I like to do is add more volume to the hair so it's not one solid flat color. And I do this by taking black and white and going over the areas that are darker and lighter on her hair already, smudging them out so they blend in nicely, really highlighting and accentuating each strand even of her hair. So you blend them together and then you put that layer on soft light and lower the opacity a bunch so that, you know, you can barely notice it. It doesn't look like it does right now. Once you do that, then the next thing I like to do is make a new layer, put it on color, and get a nice orangey or yellowish reddish color and start doing the same thing, only with this color. I blend out that color and it's really nice because it'll add more dimension in a different color so her hair is not one solid flat color. Lower the opacity, that's super important because otherwise she'll look like she has ridiculous orange highlights. The last step that I do, and you can do this while you're doing the hair, whenever you're comfortable with it, is the eyebrows. So you put the eyebrows on color, duplicate the layer, and put it on soft light so it darkens it up. And then I select both of those layers and drag them underneath my hair coloring layers so that way they don't interfere with the coloring I've already done on those strands. The next thing that I do is the lips, and I picked this trick up from my friend Chelsea. I used to color them in with a color, but now I lasso around them with the polygonal lasso tool. And then select the hue saturation layer, and as you saw, I moved it slightly to the left, and then you can change the saturation to make them softer or more vibrant, and you can change the darkness or lightness. That's a really good way to do it. And then from there I take the eyedropper tool and pick a pink from there and start using that to create more depth in her lips. So I have a multiply layer around her lips to darken it. I then create a soft light layer and go over top of it to add a little bit more pop and color and then lower the opacity on that. And then finally I take a screen layer with the same color and add the extra little highlights to make it a little more dimensional as well, and then blend them out. Then while I still have this color, I create a new layer, put it on multiply, and then start coloring for her cheeks. This is a nice contouring blush. There are different, you can make it color or soft light or whatever you want, but I like multiply because it gives it a little bit more of a contour. I use the smudge tool then to blend in her cheeks. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but I use the smudge tool a lot. It's super helpful. Blend it in and then lower the opacity way, way down so it's not super noticeable unless you're totally digging this ridiculously awkwardly red cheek thing. That's not very realistic though. So the next thing that I do, which I've started doing recently, is add a little bit of a pinkish orangey layer on top, pretty much in her T-zone, and lower the opacity a lot so that way it brings a little bit more red and color to her face. Again, it's making it more tonal and different colors instead of one flat color. Next I'm going to do her eyes. So I create a layer below the orange skin tone layer. It's important that you do that below the layer. And then I take, these eyes are going to be blue. I do color or soft light and then start adding multiply and soft light around the edges, so that way it really makes a difference between light to dark. Make sure anything that spills over the edges into the whites of her eyes you erase with your eraser, so that way she doesn't have like blue or green eye, like whites of the eyes. The next thing I'm going to do is her eyeshadow. It really helps if you look up makeup tutorials or are good at makeup yourself. I, for one, am not, but my sister is, so I kind of get an idea. I do smoky eyes a lot. You do a dark color on color, and then lower the opacity a great amount and blend it in. And then to get that extra darker near the lid of the eye, I do the same color again and put the layer on multiply. I also like to add eyeliner, which is just taking the same color and then doing a thin line of it on multiply and blending the line out and lowering the opacity. The other thing that I like doing is adding highlights. For this specific one, I take white and go around the corners of her eyes and also up below her eyebrow arch and really blend them in and lower the opacity and put them on soft light, so it really makes her eyes pop more. Okay, now that her face is done, it's time to do her clothes. So I like to get a nice big overall coat and go to selective color and then choose my clothes there by doing neutral and then moving around the shifts. So I wanted her to have kind of a tealish blue shirt, so that's what I came up with, and then I lowered the opacity because that was much too bright for what I was envisioning. Once I did that, I took the eraser, went on the selective color layer mask, and then just, again, erased all of the blue where it wasn't supposed to be, so the background and the whites of her eyes. It's a little bit easier this time around since it's below the skin layer. You don't have to worry about getting along those lines because it'll cover over it anyway. The most you have to worry about is making sure the shirt is cut out. Like the hair, I added more colors to my shirt so that it wasn't one flat color. So again, I used the eyedropper tool to pull one of the blues up, and then I didn't like how similar it was, so I changed that color to a different variation of the blue. There is no real way that I did this. I kind of just added color wherever I felt like it and used opacity a lot, lowered the opacity a lot. So that way it would still blend, but you know, it's a subtle difference that counts. Once I got the shirt done, it was time for me to do the background, which I changed my mind so many times about what I wanted it to be, but I think I finally decided on the reddish pinkish background. Honestly, you can do whatever you want, but if your hair is kind of really frizzy, it might be nice to pick a color that sticks close to your hair so that way it blends better and it's not really awkwardly pushed out like that. So as you can see, I'm picking my color here, and when I finished picking it, I really liked the effect it had on the shirt, which I was not expecting. So I decided to stick with it. The gray parts I did over the shirt specifically they really stood out when I did this, so I lowered the opacity on them. But other than that, I left. Normally I would erase over the shirt where this color was, but I actually liked what the color did to it, so I just lowered the opacity and left everything as it was. The last little bit that I did was add some finishing coloring. This is another thing that I picked up from my friend Chelsea, and it's adding a selective color. I like making the yellow a lot pinker and the red also a lot pinker because it helps give her skin a more peachy tone, which is definitely more realistic and it's nice. However, as you see here, it's like a tad way too pink. Yeah, it's too pink. So once I finish it, I lower the opacity. So that way it's pinker than it was, but not ridiculously so. From there, I just go through my normal adding vibrance, adding different contrasts and darkness, and making sure everything fits together. This is a very much different between everything you do as you go, practice makes perfect kind of thing. So just experiment. Once you've gotten all of your coloring ready where you want it to be, you could stop right there. That's totally fine. I like to use topaz. So I merge everything together, create new layers, and add topaz. Now, a big warning, if you're going to use topaz clean, make sure that you definitely have different opacities because straight up topaz is very strong and doesn't always look great. So be mindful when you're using it. I also added like a sharpening layer just to sharpen those details that sometimes get lost when you upload them. And there you go. That is the final product, and that's how you take a black and white image and make it colored. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. If you have any questions, please leave them for me. Thanks!